Jake Thompson leaned against the gleaming chrome wall of Starbase Epsilon, watching the procession of cavalry diplomats sweep through the bustling arrival terminal. Their pearlescent horns caught the artificial light, creating prismatic reflections that danced across the polished floor. The lead diplomats, Bone Ridge's delicate crystalline structures that curved along her violet skin, marked her as nobility among their kind. Another batch of stuck-up space elves, muttered Carlos, Jake's fellow pilot, from beside him. Check out those looks they're giving everyone. Jake tracked the cavalry delegation's movement. Their elongated eyes, iridescent and cold, barely acknowledged the human staff that scurried to clear their path, the leader particularly striking with elaborate spiraling horns that mark her high status, carried herself with such rigid posture that Jake wondered if her spine was made of titanium. That's Tan Caval Morath, Carlos said, pulling up her profile on his datapad. Warrior diplomat. Apparently she's some big shot in their military caste. Word is she's made her opinions about humans pretty clear in the past. ODI. Jake's lips quirked. What kind of opinions? The kind where she called us depressingly under-evolved in front of the Galactic Council. Carlos snorted, said our lack of proper physiological development made us unsuitable for advanced diplomatic relations. Charming. Jake watched as Toronto paused to examine a human security officer with barely concealed revulsion, her features sharp and angular in the way all cavalry were twisted into what could only be described as a sneer. The terminal's announcement system crackled. Captain Jake Thompson, please report to Admiral Hawthorne's office. Immediately saved by the bell from more alien watching, Jake said, pushing off from the wall. Catch you later. The walk to Admiral Hawthorne's office gave Jake time to wonder what kind of assignment was coming his way. The last 3 had been routine transport runs, boring, but paid well. He joined the Independent Pilot Corps after leaving Special Forces specifically to avoid excitement. The Admiral's office door slid open with a soft hiss. Jake stopped short. Standing at the Admiral's desk was Torona herself, her violet skin almost luminescent under the office lights. Captain Thompson. Admiral Hawthorne gestured him forward. Perfect timing. I'd like you to meet Ambassador Tron Val Morath. Tana's gaze raked over Jake, her expression suggesting she'd found something unpleasant stuck to her boot. This is the pilot you spoke of, Jake Thompson, man. He gave her his best irreverent grin. Former Special Forces, now independent contractor. I hear you're a fan of humans. Her horns seemed to bristle. Admiral, surely there must be more suitable options available. Captain Thompson is our best pilot, Hawthorne said firmly, and given the sensitive nature of this mission, we need someone with both his skill set and security clearance. Jake's interest peaked. What mission are we talking about? Hawthorne activated his desk display, bringing up a holographic star chart. The cavalry government has detected energy signatures matching a lost artifact of their civilization, the heart of Kavab, a crystalline power source that was thought destroyed centuries ago, and you want me to fly the ambassador to retrieve it? Jake asked, already seeing where this was going. Correct. Hawthorne's expression was carefully neutral. You'll be working closely with Ambassador Tana for the duration of this mission. The success of this operation could significantly improve human cavalry relations. Tan's elongated eyes narrowed. I must protest, this human lacks the proper. With all due respect, Ambassador. Jake cut in, enjoying the way her horns trembled with indignation. I've flown through asteroid fields while under fire from pirates. I've landed ships on planets with atmosphere so thick it melts standard holes. Whatever this mission needs, I can handle it. How typically human, she said, voice dripping with disdain. Confusing brute force with finesse. This mission requires delicacy, precision, both of which I have in abundance. Jake winked at her, along with a charming personality that I'm sure will grow on you. The sound she made could only be described as a hiss. Admiral, I cannot work with this. This decision is final, Hawthorne said, his tone brooking no argument. You'll depart at 800 tomorrow. Captain Thompson will brief you on the ship's protocols and safety procedures before launch. Tan's horns flared with an iridescent pulse that Jake interpreted as barely contained rage. He found himself fascinated by the way her bone ridges caught the light, creating patterns that shifted with her emotions. Very well. she said through clenched teeth. "But I want it noted that I consider this arrangement highly inappropriate," noted Hawthorne said dryly. Dismissed. Jake followed Tana into the corridor, maintaining an easy pace. Behind her rapid stride, her ceremonial robes, made of some shimmering material that seemed to absorb and reflect light, simultaneously rustled with each aggressive step. So he said cheerfully, "Should we discuss ship protocols over dinner? I know this great Earth cuisine restaurant." She whirled to face him, her height bringing her eye level with him. Up close, the intricate patterns of her bone ridges were even more impressive. "Listen carefully, human. I am not here to socialize. I am here to retrieve a sacred artifact of my people. You are merely the unfortunate necessity I must endure to accomplish this task." Ouch. Jake pressed a hand to his chest in mock hurt. "And here I was planning to show you my collection of rare space rocks. I even have a few that sparkle." Her eyes narrowed to glowing slits. "Your attempt at humor is as primitive as your species. Evolutionary development. You know what they say about evolution. It's not the strongest that survived, but the most adaptable." He gestured down the cooter. "Speaking of which, my ship's this way. Unless you prefer to continue exchanging compliments in the hallway." Torin made a sound that might have been a suppressed growl and stalked past him. Jake took a moment to appreciate the way her anger manifested in subtle waves of color across her horns, before following the docking bay housed Jake's pride and joy, the Stellar Wind, a modified Pathfinder-class exploration vessel. She wasn't the newest ship in the fleet, but Jake had personally overseen every upgrade and modification. "This is our transport." Tan's tone suggested she was looking at something scraped off the bottom of a garbage scow. "This," Jake said proudly, "is the fastest independent vessel in 3 sectors. She's got modified shields that can handle solar flares and AI navigation system that can plot courses through quantum storms, and the most comfortable pilot's chair this side of the galaxy. It looks like it was assembled from spare parts. Some of the best things are." Jake pressed his palm to the entrance scanner, and the ship's main hatch slid open with a smooth hiss. "After you, Ambassador." Tan's entrance into the ship was a study in contained disdain. She examined every surface, as if expecting to find primitive cave paintings, her bone ridges virtually vibrating with disapproval. "The cargo hold is through there," Jake said, pointing. "Crew quarters are on the lower deck. Bridge is up top. Would you like the full tour, or should I just show you to your cabin so you can properly document all its inadequacies?" She fixed him with those luminous eyes. "You seem to find this situation amusing." "I find most situations amusing. It's part of my primitive charm." "There is nothing charming about." She stopped abruptly, visibly composing herself. "Show me to my quarters. I need to prepare for tomorrow's departure." Jake led her down to the crew deck, deliberately taking the long way to give her a better view of the ship's capabilities. He didn't miss the way her expression shifted slightly when they passed the advanced sensor array and weapon systems. "Here we are." He pressed the door control, revealing a spacious cabin he'd specially prepared. "I had the environmental controls adjusted to cavalry standard atmosphere and temperature. The bed's been modified with the crystalline support structure your people prefer." For the first time, Tan's perfect mask of contempt cracks slightly. "You adapted the quarters specifically for cavalry physiology, like I said." Adaptability. He leaned against the doorframe. "There's also a detailed ship's manual loaded onto the room's terminal, including emergency procedures and evacuation protocols, though I'm sure such primitive technology is beneath your notice." Her horns flickered with what might have been embarrassment. "I will review the materials." "Great. We lift off at 800. Try not to let the human stench bother you too much until then." He left her standing in the doorway, her expression caught between outrage and something that might have been reluctant respect. The next morning, Jake arrived on the bridge early to find Tana already there, examining the ship's systems with intense focus. "Good morning, sunshine," he called out cheerfully. "Sleep well in your crystal bed." The accommodations were adequate. She straightened, managing to look down at him despite their similar height. "I have reviewed your ship capabilities. They are less primitive than I initially assumed." High praise. Indeed, Jake dropped into the pilot's chair, beginning his pre-flight checks. I'll make sure to record that in the ship's log. Day 1 Cavalry Ambassador admits human technology. Not completely worthless. Your persistent attempts at humor do not change the fact that this mission is of utmost importance to my people. She moved to stand beside his chair, her presence radiating authority. The heart of Caval is not merely an artifact. It is a symbol of our civilization's greatest achievements. Jake's fingers danced across the controls, bringing the ship's systems online. And what exactly does this heart do besides look pretty and make cavalry feel superior? It is a power source of unprecedented capability. Tan's voice took on a reverent quality. Created during our golden age, it could power entire cities with clean energy. Its loss was devastating to our people. And now, you found it again. Jake glanced up at her. Any idea how it ended up lost in the first place? Her horns darkened slightly, the cavalry equivalent of a blush. There were internal conflicts in our history. The heart was thought destroyed during one such period of unrest. So even the perfect cavalry had their moments of violence and stupidity. How refreshingly human of you. We learn from our mistakes. She snapped. Unlike some species who seem determined to repeat theirs endlessly. Speaking of mistakes, Jake said, checking the navigation display, your government's coordinates point to a section of uncharted space. The latest surveys show significant gravitational anomalies in that region. Tana leaned forward to examine the display, bringing her close enough that Jake could detect a faint crystalline scent like ice and minerals. The heart's energy signature is unmistakable. Able, whatever dangers the region holds, we must proceed. Well then, Jake said, initiating the launch sequence. Strap in, Ambassador. Let's go find your shiny rock. The takeoff was smooth. Jake made sure of that, if only to deny Tan another reason to criticize human piloting skills. As they cleared the star base's gravitational field, he plotted their course through the complicated space lanes that would lead them to their destination. I notice you've chosen a rather indirect route, Hannah observed from her position at the secondary console. Those gravitational anomalies I mentioned, they play havoc with standard navigation. We'll need to skirt around the worst of them, unless you want to end up as space dust. Perhaps if you had access to more advanced navigational technology. Let me guess, Jake cut in. Cavalry ships can just plow straight through spatial distortions, using the power of superiority. Her horns flared. We understand the fundamental principles of space-time far better than an alarm cut through their bickering. Jake's hands flew across the controls as the ship's sensors detected something massive emerging from FTL. Travel directly in their path. Speaking of superior understanding, he said, already adjusting their course. I don't suppose your people predicted that someone else might be interested in finding your lost artifact. The massive ship that appeared before them bore the distinctive predatory design of outcaster raiders, pirates who specialized in hunting down and stealing valuable artifacts. Tan's composed facade cracked entirely. How did they? This mission was classified at the highest levels. Funny thing about valuable artifacts, Jake said, his fingers dancing across the controls as he prepared for evasive maneuvers. Word tends to get around. The stellar wind sensor screamed as the raider ship launched its first volley. Jake's modifications proved their worth as he threw the ship into a spiral that no standard vessel could have managed, avoiding the energy beams by meters. Hold on to something, Ambassador, he called out. Things are about to get interesting. After successfully evading the raiders through a series of risky maneuvers that took them into an asteroid field, the stellar wind settled into a more stable course. Torin had maintained her rigid posture throughout the entire encounter, though Jake noticed her knuckles had turned a lighter shade of violet from gripping her seat. Well, Jake said, leaning back in his chair with dull casualness. That was a nice warm-up. Always good to get the blood flowing early in a mission. Tan's horns vibrated with barely contained fury. You call that reckless display of primitive piloting technique a warm-up? We nearly collided with 3 separate asteroids, nearly being the operative word. He flashed her a grin. Besides, I thought you cavalry appreciated displays of skill and power. What we appreciate, she said icily, is precision and control. Something you clearly lack given how you throw yourself at danger like an untrained juvenile. Jake swiveled his chair to face her fully. You know what I think. I think you're just upset that a soft human saved your crystalline behind. Back there, her elongated eyes narrowed to slits. I am not upset. I am concerned that this mission has been entrusted to someone who clearly lacks the necessary refinement for such a delicate operation. Refinement? Jake snorted. We're hunting for a lost artifact in uncharted space with raiders on our tail. This isn't exactly a diplomatic tea party. Everything is a diplomatic matter when it concerns the heart of Cavill. She rose from her seat, looming over him with all the imperious dignity her species was known for. But I wouldn't expect someone of your evolutionary status to understand such nuances. There you go again with the evolution comments. Jake stretched deliberately, enjoying how it made her horns twitch. You know, for someone so evolved, you sure spend a lot of time looking down on others. Must be tiring being so superior all the time. Before she could respond, the ship sensors began picking up an unusual energy signature. Jake turned back to his console, fingers flying over the controls as he analyzed the reading. Well, he murmured, look what we found. Tun moved closer, her previous disdain temporarily forgotten as she studied the readings. That pattern, it matches the heart's energy signature perfectly. Yeah, and it's coming from there. Jake brought up a holographic display of a planet dark for Boeing and decidedly uninviting. No previous records of this world in any database I can access. Atmosphere looks toxic, gravities all over the place, and those energy readings, he whistled, they're not just from your artifact. This whole planet is putting out some seriously weird vibes. The heart's presence could be affecting the planetary environment. Tun said, her scientific interest briefly overriding her contempt. Its power was always somewhat unpredictable. Great. So we're heading to an unknown death world to find an unpredictable super battery. Jake grinned up at her. Still think I'm too soft for this job? Tun's expression hardened again. Operating a vessel through space is one thing. Handling an artifact of such significance requires a level of sophistication that only your species possesses. Yeah, I got it. Jake plotted a course toward the planet. Well, Ambassador, sophisticated or not, I'm all you've got, so why don't you go prepare whatever ritual equipment you need, and I'll focus on getting us there in one piece. She drew herself up to her full height. Very well, but remember, human, you are merely transportation. Once we reach the planet surface, you will defer to my expertise in all matters concerning the heart. Wouldn't dream of interfering with your expertise, Jake said with exaggerated deference. I'll just stay in my lane. Being all primitive and unsophisticated, Torin turned and stalked off the bridge, her ceremonial robes swishing with barely contained agitation. Jake watched her go, then turned back to study the mysterious planet ahead. Despite his casual attitude, something about those energy readings made his combat-trained instincts tingle with warning. This mission was about to get a lot more interesting than either of them had bargained for. The descent through the planet's atmosphere tested even Jake's considerable piloting skills. The stellar wind bucked and shuddered against gravitational eddies that seemed to defy physics itself. Still think I'm just transportation, Jake called out as he wrestled with the controls. Tana, strapped into the co-pilot's seat, didn't respond. Her normally violet skin had taken on a distinctly paler shade. They broke through the cloud layer into a landscape that looked like something out of a nightmare. Twisted rock formations jutted up through pools of what appeared to be liquid metal, while the sky above swirled with colors that shouldn't exist in nature. Charming vacation spot, Jake muttered, scanning for a landing zone. The toxic atmosphere really adds to the ambience. The heart's energy signature is strongest in that direction. Toronto pointed toward a valley between two particularly menacing and rock formations. The ship lurched violently as something massive moved beneath them. Jake's hands flew across the controls, compensating for the sudden turbulence. What the hell was that unknown indigenous life form? Toronto reported, studying her scanner. And it appears to be rising. It turned out to be a creature that resembled a cross between a mountain and a serpent. Its crystalline scales Reflecting the alien light in dizzying patterns, it rose from one of the metallic pools, its massive head tracking their ship's movement. "Hold on." Jake yanked the controls hard, sending them into a spiral that barely avoided the creature. Snapping jaws, he found a relatively stable plateau and brought the ship down with more force than finesse. That, Tana said as she unstrapped herself, was actually somewhat impressive. "Be careful, Ambassador." That almost sounded like a compliment. They suited up in the cargo bay, Jake double-checking. Both their and Enel suits, the planet's atmosphere would eat through unprotected equipment in minutes. "I can check my own." Yerton snapped when he moved to Inspector Seal. "Sure you can, but since my primitive life depends on you not dying and leaving me stranded here, I'm going to do it anyway." Her horns flickered with annoyance, but she allowed the inspection. Jake noted that her ceremonial robes had been replaced with practical combat gear that highlighted her warrior status. The bone ridges along her arms, as usually hidden, were now clearly visible through the transparent sections of her suit. They stepped out onto the planet's surface, and reality seemed to twist around them. The ground beneath their feet hummed with energy, while the air itself appeared to shimmer with barely contained power. "The heart's influence," Tana explained, consulting her scanner. "It's affecting the entire environment. The signature is strongest." That way they began their trek across the hostile landscape, each step requiring careful consideration. The metallic pools weren't just decorative. They emitted corrosive vapors that could eat through their suits given enough exposure, so Jake said, as they picked their way around a particularly nasty-looking puddle. "What makes this heart thing so special anyway, besides the whole power of 1,000 suns?" But Tan's response was cut off by a shriek that seemed to come from the rocks themselves. They spun to face a pack of creatures that looked like living crystal formations, their razor-sharp edges gleaming with predatory intent. "Down!" Jake shouted, shoving Tan aside. As one of the creatures launched itself at her, he drew his plasma rifle in the same motion, firing 3 precise shots that shattered the attacker into glittering shards. The rest of the pack attacked as one. Jake and Tana found themselves fighting back to back, their earlier antagonism forgotten in the heat of battle. She moved with the fluid grace of a trained warrior, her own weapons cutting through the crystalline predators with surgical precision. The battle lasted only minutes, but it left them both breathing hard. Jake turned to check on Tan, just as one final creature lunged from behind a rock formation. Its crystalline claws raked across his suit before he could react, tearing through the reinforced material. Tana's plasma burst reduced the creature to dust, but the damage was done. Warning lights flashed across Jake's helmet. "Display suit integrity compromised," the computer announced. "Atmospheric contamination imminent." "Get back to the ship," Tan ordered, her voice tight with unexpected concern. Jake checked his readings. "No time. The corrosive atmosphere is already eating through the tiers." Without hesitation, he began unfastening the upper portion of his suit. "Help me get this off before it spreads to the rest." "Are you insane? The atmosphere will. The lower half is intact." He cut her off, already pulling at the damaged sections. "The ship's atmospheric shield extends about 20 meters. As long as we stay within that radius, I'll survive." Tana moved to help him, her usually graceful movements suddenly hesitant. The damaged upper section of the suit came free, leaving Jake bare chested in the alien air. The ship's protective field shimmered around them, keeping the worst of the toxic atmosphere at bay. Jake looked up to find Tana frozen, her elongated eyes wide and fixed on his torso. Her horns were pulsing with a light he hadn't seen before, and her bone ridges seemed to vibrate slightly. "You okay there, Ambassador?" he asked, unable to keep the amusement from his voice. She seemed to struggle for words, something he'd never seen before. "Your physiological structure is unexpected." Jake glanced down at his well-defined muscles, shaped by years of special forces training. "What, this just standard human maintenance? Though I do put in extra gym time." Standard, her voice cracked slightly. "This level of muscular definition and symmetry would mark you as a lead among my people. It's a sign of." She caught herself, horns flashing with embarrassment. We should focus on the mission, but Jake had caught the way her eyes kept darting back to him, the subtle shifts in her horn patterns that betrayed her interest. A grin spread across his face. If you want to examine human physiology more closely, you just have to ask. I am doing no such thing. Her voice rose an octave. I am merely surprised that your species is capable of achieving such physical development. Jake stretched deliberately, enjoying the way her eyes tracked the movement. And here I thought I was just soft and primitive. Tana turned away sharply, but not before he caught another pulse of light through her horns. We should secure the perimeter while your backup suit is retrieved from the ship. Good idea. Wouldn't want any more crystal cats catching us off guard. He moved past her, making sure to stay within the ship's protective field, though I have to say we made a pretty good team back there. Your combat skills are adequate, she admitted, falling into step beside him. He noticed she was keeping slightly more distance between them than before, as if afraid to get too close to his. Stumbling, Jake reached out, instinctively catching Tana before she could fall. Her skin was surprisingly warm through her suit, and he felt a slight vibration from her bone ridges where they touched. For a moment, they stood frozen in that position, her violet eyes wide as they met his. Then she jerked away as if burned, her horns practically strobing with agitation. We should return to the ship, she said, her voice higher than normal. Your backup suit. Another tremor, stronger this time, interrupted her. A chasm began opening in the ground between them and the ship, forcing them to scramble backward. The heart's energy is destabilizing the entire area. Tan shouted over the growing rumble. We need to. The ledge beneath her feet suddenly crumbled without thinking. Jake lunged forward, grabbing her arm and pulling her to safety. The movement brought them chest to chest, her bone ridges actually brushing against his bare skin. Toronto went completely still, her horns glowing so brightly they cast shadows. Jake could feel her heart racing through her suit, matching his own elevated pulse. You're welcome, he said softly, not letting go just yet. She seemed to be having trouble forming words that was unnecessary. I could have. Yeah, his grin widened. Could have. What? A distant roar snapped them both back to reality. The crystal serpent from earlier was rising again, its massive form blocking out the alien sky. We need to move, Toran said, finally pulling away. Was it his imagination, or did she do it more slowly than necessary? There's a cave system ahead that should lead us toward the heart signal. Lead the way, Jake said, noting how she very carefully didn't look at him as she turned. An ambassador, next time you want to get close enough to check out my abs, you don't need to wait for an emergency. The sound she made was somewhere between a laugh and a groan. You are impossible. You like it this time. She didn't deny it. The cave system twisted deep into the planet's crust, illuminated by veins of crystalline minerals that pulsed with the same energy signature as the heart. Jake's backup suit had been rendered unreachable by the growing chasm, forcing him to continue shirtless within the portable shield generator field. These readings are getting stronger, Tana said, studying her scanner with intense focus. Too intense, Jake noticed, as if she was deliberately avoiding looking at him. The heart must be close. Great. And I'm sure whatever is guarding it will be just as friendly as everything else we've met. Jake kept his plasma rifle ready, scanning the shadows between the crystal formations. You still haven't told me exactly what happened to this artifact in the first place. Ton steps faltered slightly. It's complicated. During our civil war, there were factions who believed the heart's power should be used for military purposes. Others wanted to protect its peaceful applications. The fighting led to mistakes that got people killed. Yes, her voice softened. My ancestor was among those who tried to protect it. She failed. Jake caught something in her tone. And now you're trying to finish what she started. Is that so difficult to believe? She glanced back at him, then quickly away again as her horns flickered. That even primitive emotions like family honor might drive me. Actually, Jake said, moving closer, it makes you seem more relatable, almost human. I am nothing like. She cut off as another tremor shook the cavern. Crystal shards rained down from above. Jake pulled her against him, shielding her with his body. As the debris clattered around them, the contact seemed to short-circuit her usual composure. He could feel her bone ridges vibrating against his chest. He said when the shower of crystals ended. For someone who claims to find humans physically repulsive. You're not exactly rushing to put distance between us. Her horns flashed brilliantly. That is, the tactical situation requires you to press yourself against my chest. You are the most infuriating. She pushed away, but not before he caught the way her hands lingered on his shoulders. We have a mission to complete. They pressed deeper into the cave system, the energy readings growing stronger with each step. Jake couldn't help but notice how Tan's usual fluid grace had become almost jerky, especially whenever she had to turn toward him. Her composure was cracking, and they both knew it. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber dominated by a pool of swirling energy. Floating above it was a crystalline structure that could only be the heart, a geometric shape that seemed to fold in on itself impossibly, radiating power that made the air itself crackle. There it is, Tun breathed, her voice filled with a after all this time. Yeah, and we're not the only ones who found it. The raiders from earlier emerged from the shadows, weapons trained on them. Their leader, a scared outcaster with cybernetic enhancements, stepped forward. Thanks for leading us right to it, he growled. Drop your weapons. Jake assessed the situation quickly. 6 raiders, all armed with high-grade weapons. The odds weren't great, but he'd faced worse. The heart cannot fall into their hands, Toronto whispered. Its power. Would I know? Jake's muscles tensed as he prepared to move. Trust me. She met his eyes, and for once didn't look away. Surprisingly, yes. Jake moved with explosive speed, tackling Tana aside as plasma fire erupted. They rolled behind a crystal formation. As the chamber erupted into chaos, what followed was the deadly dance of fire and shadow. Jake and Toronto worked in perfect sync, as if they'd fought together for years instead of hours. Her precise shooting complemented his aggressive style, and together they began whittling down the raiders' numbers. But the firefight was having an effect on the chamber. The energy pool began to pulse erratically, sending waves of power through the crystals around them. The very air seemed to be coming apart. The heart is destabilizing, Tan shouted. If it continues. The chamber shuddered violently. Cracks appeared in the ceiling, sending massive crystal shards plummeting down. Tana lunged for the heart, determined to complete her mission. Despite the danger, Jake saw the falling crystal before she did. A massive shard aimed directly at her. Without hesitation, he sprinted forward, muscles burning with effort. He reached her just as the crystal fell, wrapping his arms around her and spinning them both away. The shard missed them by inches, but the momentum sent them tumbling. Jake took the brunt of the impact, ensuring Tan landed safely on top of him. For a moment they lay, their hearts racing. Her face was inches from his, her horns casting a soft glow over his features. Something shifted in her expression, a final barrier breaking down. You could have been killed, she whispered. Couldn't let anything happen to my favorite critic of human evolution. His smile was genuine this time, not teasing. I may have been hasty in some of my judgments. Her bone ridges were vibrating in a way he'd never seen before, creating patterns that seemed almost intimate. The chamber shuddered again, reminding them of their situation. The remaining raiders had fled, leaving them alone with the increasingly unstable heart. We need to stabilize it, Tirana said reluctantly, pulling away from him, but the energy output is too dangerous to approach without protection. Jake looked at the hearth and at Tan. Good thing you've got a primitive human here who's already half naked and apparently pretty good at surviving impossible situations. Her eyes widened. It's too dangerous. The energy could kill me. Yeah, probably, he stood, rolling his shoulders. But you've got a mission to complete, Ambassador, and I've got a point to prove about human capability. Before she could test, he strode toward the heart, feeling the energy begin to tear at his skin. But he didn't stop. One step at a time, fighting against pain that threatened to overwhelm him, he reached the artifact. The last thing he saw before consciousness faded was Tan's face, her expression, a mixture of horror, admiration, and something else, something that looked remarkably like the beginning of love. Consciousness returned to Jake slowly, accompanied by the steady hum of medical equipment. His first sensation was warmth, unusual given standard hospital settings. Then he realized the temperature had been adjusted to cavalry preferences. If you die, I will personally resurrect you just to kill you again. Tan's voice was tight With an emotion he never heard from her before, Jake opened his eyes to find her sitting beside his bed, her usual regal posture abandoned in favor of anxious vigilance. "That's sweet," he coaxed. "You do care." Her horns flashed with multiple cold relief, anger, and something deeper. "What you did was reckless, foolish, completely successful." He managed a weak grin. "Since I'm not dead, and you're holding the heart." Indeed, the artifact sat in a containment field nearby, his geometric impossibility now stable and controlled. Tana glanced at it, then back to him. "You could have died. Worth it to see you admit a human did something impressive." Her expression shifted, bone ridges vibrating with intensity. "Impressive. You walked into an energy field that should have disintegrated you. Instantly you survived something that would have killed most cavalry warriors, and you did it shirtless," Jake suggested. "Yeah, that probably helped with the dramatic effect. Be serious." But her horns betrayed her with a pulse that he was starting to recognize as attraction. "You risked everything to help me complete my mission to restore my family's honor to prove you wrong about humans." He tried to sit up, wincing at the effort. "Did it work?" Tan moved forward, helping him adjust his position. Her hands lingered on his shoulders longer than necessary. "Perhaps I was hasty in some of my judgments, just some. Don't push your luck." But there was no bite in her words. She hadn't moved away, keeping herself close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her bone ridges. "Your actions have challenged certain assumptions." Jake reached up carefully, tracing one of her horn patterns with his finger. She shivered, but didn't pull away. "Just certain assumptions. You are impossible." Her voice had dropped to a whisper. "And yet here you are, still not running away from the primitive human." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Tan's horns began to glow with an intensity he'd never seen before. "Prove it," she said suddenly. "Prove what?" "Prove you're worthy by cavalry standards." Her voice carried a challenge, but her eyes held something softer. "If you think you can handle our traditions." Jake's grin widened. "Ambassador, are you asking me to court you?" "I am offering you the chance to demonstrate your capabilities." But her horns were practically strobing now. "Unless you feel it's beyond your evolutionary level." "Oh, now it's personal." With effort he swung his legs over the side of the bed. "What's first? Trial by combat, feat of strength? Please tell me." "It involves being shirtless again." Tana made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You are the most infuriating, arrogant, completely fascinating being I have ever encountered. Fascinating enough to make you reconsider those beauty standards of yours." Instead of answering, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, an intimate gesture among her people. Her bone ridges hummed against his skin, creating patterns he could feel rather than see. "I think," she said softly, "that beauty may be more complex than either of our peoples realized." Several weeks later, aboard Starbase Epsilon, "I still think this is a terrible idea," Admiral Hawthorne muttered, adjusting his formal uniform. The station's main conference room had been transformed for the official ceremony marking the return of the heart of Caval and the unprecedented diplomatic agreement that came with it. "On the contrary," Jake said cheerfully, "I think it's the best terrible idea in the history of human-alien relations." He was dressed in a combination of human formal wear and traditional cavalry ceremonial armor, the latter modified to accommodate his less crystalline physique. Tana emerged from an adjacent chamber resplendent in her full ceremonial regalia. Her horns caught the light in ways that made several human diplomats blink in confusion, while her bone ridges created patterns that had the cavalry delegates murmuring in approval. "You're staring again," she said as she approached Jake. "Can you blame me? I mean, look at those horn patterns. Very sophisticated." Her eyes narrowed, but her horns betrayed her amusement. "You're never going to let me live down my initial assessments of humans, are you?" "Not a chance." He offered his arm in the formal cavalry manner, ready to scandalize two civilizations. The ceremony itself was a study in controlled chaos. The Cavalry High Council members, appearing via hologram, visibly struggled to maintain their composure as Tyan formally announced her intention to pursue a diplomatic union with a human. Their horns flickered with such rapid color changes that several technical staff worried about power surges. "This is unprecedented," one council member sputtered. "The mixing of our noble bloodlines with a species capable of retrieving your sacred artifact when your own warriors couldn't," Jake suggested helpfully. Tan elbowed him But her horns flashed with suppressed laughter. The human delegation wasn't much better, several ambassadors seemed unable to stop staring at Tan's bone structures, while others kept shooting concerned glances at Jake's modified ceremonial armor. It's quite simple, Torin addressed both sides. Our mission proved that our preconceptions about each other were not just wrong but dangerous. The heart was lost because our people couldn't see past their prejudices. It was recovered because we learned to look beyond surface differences, also because I look great shirtless, Jake whispered this time. Her elbow hit harder. The point, she continued, is that this union represents more than just a personal choice. It represents the possibility of true understanding between our peoples, and if anyone has a problem with it, Jake added, they're welcome to challenge me to traditional cavalry combat. I've been practicing that. Got a reaction from both sides, horror from the humans who knew about cavalry combat traditions and reluctant respect from the cavalry who had reviewed his combat footage from the mission. The reception afterward was equally entertaining. Jake found himself surrounded by curious cavalry scientists who wanted to study human physiological development, while Tana fielded increasingly awkward questions from human diplomats about crystalline compatibility. Your brother keeps glaring at me, Jake noted as they shared a moment alone. I think his horns might actually explode. Caval is traditional, Tan admitted, though he did admit you showed impressive courage during the mission for a soft-skinned species. I'll take it. Jake grinned. Better than your aunt, who keeps asking if our children will have horns. Tan's own horns flickered with embarrassment. My family can be overwhelming. Hey, he turned to face her. Fully worth it. Her expression softened. Even with all the diplomatic chaos, the cultural clashes, the fact that half the galaxy thinks we're insane, especially because of that. He traced one of her bone ridges gently. Besides, you have to admit, we make a pretty striking couple, the noble cavalry warrior and the shirtless human hero. We could start a whole new standard of beauty. You are impossible. But she leaned into his touch, though I suppose that's part of your charm. See, you admit I'm charming. Now character growth. The reception continued around them. Two civilizations, awkwardly attempting to adjust their worldviews. Human musicians played alongside cavalry crystal harmonists, creating a strange but oddly beautiful melody. Diplomats from both sides were already discussing cultural exchange programs, though several looked like they might need strong drinks first. You know, Jake said thoughtfully, when I took this mission, I thought it would just be another transport job. Fly the stuck-up alien ambassador around, trying not to start a diplomatic incident, and instead you started the biggest diplomatic incident in recent history. But her tone was fond. Though I suppose I'm equally guilty. I was supposed to retrieve the heart and restore my family's honor, not fall for a species I considered barely evolved. Speaking of evolution, Jake's eyes twinkled. Want to really give them something to talk about? Before she could respond, he pulled her into a kiss, a very human gesture that sent ripples of shocked murmurs through both delegations. Tana's horns blazed with light, but she didn't pull away when they finally separated. She gave him a look that mixed exasperation with affection. You enjoy causing chaos, don't you? Only the good kind. He glanced at the still stunned audience. Besides, think of it as a teaching moment, breaking down cultural barriers, challenging beauty standards, proving that love transcends physiological differences, and showing off your muscles to my entire extended family. That's just a bonus. Their laughter echoed through the chamber, joined gradually by others, as the initial shock wore off. The heart of Caval pulsed gently in its display case, its energy pattern somehow harmonizing with the mixed music. So Jake said as they watched their two peoples begin the awkward but necessary process of genuine interaction. Ready for our next mission. Toronto's horns glowed with warmth. As long as you keep your shirt on during official functions, no promises. I have a reputation to maintain now. And as their peoples continued their tentative steps toward understanding, Jake and Tirana shared a smile that spoke of adventures yet to come, a human and a cavalry defying expectations, and proving that sometimes the most beautiful things in the universe are the ones that don't fit any standard. A year later, the observation deck of the Stellar Wind gleamed with a mixture of human and cavalry modifications. Crystal formations now grew alongside standard control panels, creating an aesthetic that somehow worked despite, or perhaps Because of its contradictions, Jake stood at the viewport watching the stars streak by. His modified cavalry ceremony armor had become as comfortable as his old flight suits, though he still occasionally forgot to wear the upper portion during informal occasions. The diplomatic corps sent another request. Tana said, entering the deck, her horns cast familiar patterns across the wall's amusement, affection, and the particular frequency she reserved just for him. They want us to speak at the opening of the first Joint Human Cavalry Cultural Center. Let me guess, they want me to tell the story about the heart again. Jake turned, grinning. Or just take my shirt off and let your people lecture about muscle definition. Actually, she moved to join him at the viewport. They want us to demonstrate cavalry combat techniques. Apparently, your unique interpretation of our traditional forms has sparked quite the interest. You mean the part where I combine cavalry precision with human improvisation? He pulled her closer. Or the part where I prove humans can master your evolutionary superior fighting style? Her horns flickered with mock irritation. You are never going to let me forget my initial prejudices, are you? Not a chance. It's too much fun watching you try to explain to your family how you went from humans are primitive to this particular human is acceptable. She raised an elegant eyebrow ridge. Is that what you think I tell them? Well, your cousin did mention something about you composing traditional cavalry poetry, about my perfectly sculptured physique. Tana's horns flashed with embarrassment. I am going to kill Cavill for sharing that too. Late, I already had it translated and framed. Jake dodged her half-hearted swipe. It's very touching, especially the part about my muscles gleaming like crystal in starlight. You are impossible. But she was fighting a smile. That's not what the poetry says. Their laughter mingled with the hum of the ship's engines outside. The stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the boundaries their civilizations had drawn and redrawn. You know, Jake said more seriously, a year ago, I never would have imagined this United States. Everything that's changed. Tan's horns softened to a gentle glow. Neither did I, though I must admit watching my people try to incorporate human exercise routines into their beauty regimens has been entertaining, almost as entertaining as watching humans try to grow crystal accessories. Jake touched one of her bone ridges gently. Though I still say you're beautiful, even without all the traditional markers, and you're impressive even with your regrettably smooth skin, she teased back. Though I've grown rather fond of it. A notification chimed. Another mission request. They shared a look that spoke volumes about their shared future, about barriers broken and prejudice is overcome. Ready for another adventure? Jake asked. Toronto's horns pulsed with all the colors of possibility. With you always, the stellar wind carried them onward, a living symbol of how love could bridge the stars themselves. One shirtless human and one crystal-adorned cavalry at a time. Dear friends, what started as a tale of prejudice and misunderstanding transformed into something more, a story about looking beyond our preconceptions to discover beauty in unexpected places. Jake and Tun's journey reminds us that our differences, whether physical or cultural, need not divide us. Through their adventures, we see how initial judgments can blind us to the true worth of others. Toronto's journey from disdain to understanding mirrors our own struggles with prejudice, while Jake's irreverent humor and unwavering authenticity show how being yourself can break down the strongest barriers. Their story isn't just about romance between different species. It's about challenging the standard society sets for us, about finding the courage to question what we've always believed to be true. It reminds us that beauty truly does come in all forms, and that sometimes the most meaningful connections arise from the very differences we once thought would keep us apart. So whether you're feeling out of place, judged by others' standards, or facing prejudice yourself, remember, Jake and Tun, remember that somewhere out there someone will see past the surface to appreciate who you truly are, perhaps even because of the very things others judge you for. After all, in a universe as vast and varied as ours, isn't it wonderful that love can transcend even the boundaries between stars? Keep looking up, keep challenging assumptions, and never be afraid to be uniquely, unabashedly yourself. Safe travels among